Good morning and welcome to another roundtable. A great panel today with some really interesting questions. And before we get started, just wanted to make an announcement. Some of you may know about this, some of you may not. We've launched a new networking group called 420 Connect. If you're interested in networking with like-minded professionals in the cannabis space, please send me an email, or you could also put some information in a chat box. But this is actually going to be a little bit different than perhaps other networking groups that you've experienced. We're trying to be more collaborative, inclusive, not pay to play, and welcoming. So we did have a small group meeting, just of interested parties last night. Some of you on the call may have been there. And we see that there's a lot of energy and synergy. So just wanted to make that announcement. My friend Kobe Piper and John Perlow were with me, and just wanted to say something new for you to look out for in 2022. Okay, today's agenda. We're going to consider, once again, what's happening in New Jersey in a licensing application. A lot of folks calling and emailing us about questions concerning the license application. As you know, December 15th, 2021, the portal will be open to apply for cultivator, manufacturing, and labs. And then March 15th, 2022 for the retail stores. So finally, things are getting off the ground. We're going to have a lot to say about that today. Banking in the cannabis industry. I think that we have some interesting things to talk about there. Legal aspects of the licensing application and etc. I should have put after that. Space and design consideration for cannabis retail shops. And then, of course, the boring but also very necessary accounting and tax issues that I'll be talking about perhaps. Just love that stuff. Glad that every license requires you to name an accounting firm, so that's always good for the accountants. Okay, when we get to kind of turn this over to our panel, I'm going to let them kind of say a little bit about themselves. So when I call upon them, they'll still give a little bit more detail, but you can see our lovely pictures. You can compare them with the pictures above and see if you can see if they may match, they may not match. My hair is definitely longer and grayer. My name is Todd Pollanak. I'm the partner in charge of the cannabis practice here, as well as some other things. Peter Sue recently joined with Green Check Verified. John Famberg, managing member of Brock Eichler, and Anthony, I don't know if you say your name Simone or Simon, but you'll correct Simon. Yeah. And he is a director with Ware Malcolm. So thank you guys. We're going to stay on this slide because this is kind of where we park, so you can continue to see if our pictures match. But just want to kick this off with welcoming you and thanking you for being part of this discussion. Peter, I'm going to kind of shout out to you first, because I know that we, just before the call, before we launch, we're having a discussion about a question that you raised to John the other day concerning a little sentence that's in the act about discrimination. Can you just repeat that, and maybe we can talk a little bit about that to kick it off, and also just say a little bit about yourself and your background. Do that, guys, whenever you first speak, so that I don't have to go through it.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me, and I'm honored to be part of this distinguished panel. So my name is Peter Sue. I'm a longtime banker, 25 years or so in banking, although very recently I turned banking consultant, so I guess I'm no longer a banker. I did, for the last several years, I ran a cannabis banking program for a substantially sized bank in New York, roughly $12 billion bank. I did that for a few years, and that's ground up, starting from zero. And then I joined a large, already established cannabis program for a bank that's headquartered out east, but does have East Coast operation. So two substantially sized banks, substantial size cannabis banking programs. So I do come in with a lot of banking experience, and specifically cannabis banking, which I know sounds a little weird, but I'm currently with Green Check Verify. Again, we are consultants to banks. So my clients are the banks that are providing cannabis banking to businesses. The question that I had raised, and I think it's an interesting one specific to New Jersey market, is in the regs, and John and I were sort of bantering about this, that there's one little sentence that's kind of buried in there. And the intention, I'm sure, was very good, but I worry about what the implications will mean. And John, I don't know if you know the language better, but broadly, it basically says financial institutions shall not, or cannot, discriminate against a business solely on the purpose of the fact that they are a cannabis business. Now, it's both very specific yet very broad. I guess the concern would be, what does that mean? So for example, I think most banks take the position that, hey, we will bank cannabis, but there's a lot more work involved. So as a result, we need to upcharge. And whether that's profitability or just literally covering costs, it is a necessity within the industry. So John, that's essentially the question, right? And sure, I think we can all understand what the intention was, but will that have a chilling effect? Because I do hear certain banks thinking, well, I'm looking at that sentence and I'm worried about getting sued. So we're just gonna stay out of the industry. But yeah, Todd, that is essentially the topic that I brought up.
Sure, Peter, thanks for the question. And let me give you the 30-second elevator bio. And I also echo Peter's comments. Thank you for having me today. I am the managing member of Brock Eichler. We are an 80-attorney law firm in Roseland, New Jersey, with several core practice areas, including a cannabis industry practice, which I co-chair with my partner, Charles Gormally. And we established this practice about 5 years ago. So I think we were, as a law firm, very an early entrant into the business and the space, as we were watching then candidate Phil Murphy run for governor and articulate his goal to facilitate and accelerate the decriminalization of cannabis use in the state of New Jersey, as well as the ability for adults to buy it from dispensaries. In addition to a goal to expand the number of medical dispensaries to accommodate the patients here in New Jersey. Coincidentally, just last night, 30 more medical dispensaries were announced that they were going to be approved for medical dispensary licenses, 10 in each of the 3 geographic zones, 10 up north, 10 central, 10 south. You can probably go online to see the names of who all of them are. And what's also interesting, at least as a lawyer, I saw one law firm received a license to dispense medical marijuana. We'll probably come back to that during the course of the program today. But following up on Peter's question, when the law was passed, because this is actually part of the statute, not the regulations, tucked in the 240 pages is the following sentence. A financial institution shall not, subject to the suspension or revocation of a charter or other available enforcement action by the Commissioner of Banking and Insurance, engage in any discriminatory activities with respect to the banking activities of a cannabis establishment, distributor, or delivery service, or the banking activities of a person associated with a cannabis establishment, distributor, or delivery service. Now, when we began to talk to and so that's all there is. Very vague and broad. And like the Cannabis Regulatory Commission that issued its rules and regulations some time ago, we still need to see what the Department of Banking Insurance, what they will do. Now they're tasked with developing the regulatory framework for this industry for their licensed banking institutions in the state of New Jersey. In terms of what that means and where that goes, I think it'll be somewhat gray and vague from DOBI. That's what they usually do when it comes to these tricky situations. Can a bank make a legitimate argument, hey, because of all the things we need to do, we can, it's not unreasonable to charge additional fees to a cannabis industry? We also are dealing with the federal law. And so a lot of banks, and Peter, you're probably more well versed in this than me, the banks in New Jersey have been very slow to even begin to talk to cannabis industry establishments. We do a lot of work with our banks in New Jersey for our clients in many practice areas here. And I would say as recently as 18 months ago, the banks wouldn't even have a conversation with us on this. Now, you know, with the constitutional law change in New Jersey and what's going on in the region and the efforts in Congress to change it on a federal level, now all the banks want to get into this, and they'll be developing their own divisions. And so as banks compete for this business, I think that they will welcome this industry. They're all about deposits. And if TD Bank, for example, doesn't do it, Valley will, and if Valley won't, Bank of America will, again, subject to the federal rules. So I think this won't be as much of a problem as we've seen in other states who have been a much earlier entry, where the fees to cannabis establishments have been off the charts and unreasonable. And maybe that's why this language came into this bill, when New Jersey began to see what was happening elsewhere, and they did not want to impose that hurdle or burden on this industry. They want to kickstart this industry. They want to create sure guardrails on all of this, but they want to have a glide path to make this industry as robust as it possibly can. At the same time, change and address the social equity issues that prohibition of cannabis has imposed over the last 70, 80 years.
Hey, Todd, I'd also like to chime in on this on an architecture and environment perspective. So just a quick little intro. My name is Anthony Simon. I'm the Director of Retail for Ware Malcolm, a national retail architecture firm. We've seen, with respect to emerging markets, we've seen a tremendous growth in cannabis dispensary, cultivation, and grow facilities. So with respects to what's on the horizon for New York and New Jersey, obviously, you know, it is a new landscape for those states. Some of the rule of thumb is following suit from the states that have already implemented both medical and retail dispensaries. However, in partnership with great code and expediting consultants, you know, there's a lot of you have to navigate through regulatory framework and a detailed review process, taking into account looking at the zoning analysis and municipality restrictions and NIMBY challenges. NIMBY standing for Not My Backyard. So a lot of board reviews and DOB reviews, and you know, just on a high level, alternate treatment centers, ATCs, or cannabis dispensaries, they're prohibited around, they cannot be, I believe it's 1,000 feet from any school area, and should be within 100 feet of police or law enforcement. So, you know, when we're looking at this, there's a lot of you know, documentation and design and site planning that has to go into it when we're submitting to the building department, and in advance, preparation way in advance, to go through all of these jurisdictions.
So interesting, guys, just to kind of, I want to just change the topic slightly, but it's not too much different. My discussions with various people is it seems like, at least for applying for the New Jersey license, a lot, I mean, obviously the first license that you can apply for is cultivators, manufacturer, and labs. But in talking to those folks, as well as the ones who are applying for retail, they seem to be all over the board as far as readiness. And I think also expectation as to some folks, I think, really thought that they could just fill out a form and submit it and they would be approved. And then when you start getting into what's really required, it's kind of, it's interesting just how much information is being required in order for you to get the license. can you guys just comment based upon your experience if you're seeing the same, and if there's anyone on the call who maybe is just at the beginning stage, what they really need to do. I mean, I think, Anthony, you started the conversation about the location, but anyone can jump in, Peter, Anthony, John. Talking to someone really wants to get the license, what should they have or be doing right now?
Well, let me, a number of things. First of all, here we are, less than a week away when they're going to accept licenses for the first 3. And I think over the course of the summer and the fall, we had many people approaching us and they wanted to get a license for everything. Then we began to explain to them, you can't do that. So then the next round, they says, okay, we want to get into cultivation and grow. As the panelists, and I think most of the audience knows, that is the only license where there's a limited number of licenses available. And in the statute, in the reg, it's 37. But that's a little deceiving because the 37 includes the existing licenses for grow facilities. So in reality, there's really not going to be 37 licenses available, maybe a dozen. So the competition for these licenses is fierce, number one. Number two, everybody told us, oh, they spoke to their mayor or their councilman and everybody was supporting them. And I had to remind them, hey, we're in New Jersey and mayors and politicians tell everybody exactly what they want to hear. And unless and until you get the letter that's required as part of the application, don't count on this. And we've received a lot of communications from our clients who've been extremely disappointed because as they are filling out the application online, they're realizing the commitment from the town is not there. So now the option is, do we now apply for a conditional license so that we don't have to have that letter yet, and we don't have to have our geographic location nailed down? Because before all this, we weren't even, yes, we were asking about the community support. I said, well, do you have a space? And they hadn't even begun to look at the municipalities in New Jersey that have opted into the program, thinking, oh, I have real estate, it'll be great in such and such town. But meanwhile, that town had opted out. So originally it was community support and having a location. In light of the problems, now the recommendation is move towards a conditional license. But again, these grow facility license are going to be very hard to get.
Speaking from my perspective, and Anthony, I would love to hear your thoughts on this. I feel like financing is such a big problem, right? So, especially in New York, where I'm based, and it sounds like this is a similar requirement in Jersey, which is the location. And then, of course, there's this focus on like social equity applicants, first-time business owners, things like that. And the thing is, unless you have someone that either is a major partner on the project, you're personally wealthy, and so you have this like location that you can hold vacant, right, pending a possible license. Like, how do you do that? And then, so let's say the other example, which is you're going to go out and sign a lease or something like that, right? Well, what if the landlord says, well, if I lease you this space, my bank won't refi my mortgage, or they may actually call the loan. And now, in order to refi it, I'm going to be paying a higher rate, right? Or not at all. They're going to have trouble finding that financing. And then, John, specifically on that topic, grow houses are the most difficult properties to finance. Even if you take the word cannabis out of it, you're talking about a special purpose, single use property, right? So I get this call all the time. Someone will say, oh, I've got this indoor grow house and it's worth 30 million bucks, but I look at it and I say, it's really a giant warehouse, right? Like, it's worth 30 million bucks to you. And in fact, it's a giant warehouse that you've way over improved, right? And now it's not useful for anything else. And this isn't specific to cannabis. Like we have this issue, let's say, with like data centers, right? Which again are just giant warehouses with a lot of cooling equipment. they're very difficult to finance. But yeah, Anthony, would love to hear your thoughts on like what happens when you want that property.
Well, the first thing they have to do is obviously it's before they engage with us as architects and designers. You have to do your due diligence and obviously partner with legal and consulting in respects to obtaining a cannabis license and whether that location is zoned for. It could be zoned for retail and mercantile, but obviously with this this new industry type. What is the acceptability and comfort level for a cannabis business? So, in our experience, we've provided the documentation, the program needs, where there's going to be a lot of security that's going to be, you have to have with respects to parking, as far as secure, parking conditions, the egress ways, the approach into the site, the security gates, if you're doing, your shipping and receiving and delivery services, how secure is that? Showing all your camera locations, the entry points, ADA accessibility, and then as far as interior, crowd control points and check-in and, buffer zones and secure demising walls between entry points and check-in to the kiosk and digital areas, to the actual fixturing and consumer employee engagement, and then your back of house, what from fulfillment of orders, stock storage, what's the path of egress to collect product and then distribute out for final point of sale. So, we're looking at it on a spatial aspect, both exterior, site planning, and interior. But first and foremost, before we even file for the building department, it's the cannabis licensing, cannabis business licensing that we're preparing for our clients.
So guys, just to be clear, because John, you made a really good point of going for a conditional license. The folks who want to do cultivation in the micro business, which obviously has its limitations, that's not capped. It's the folks going for the cultivator licenses that is, there's the space is not limited like the micro. Is that correct? Just so we can clarify for the people listening. This could be for anyone on the call.
I mean, I don't think there's limitations with respects to the medical, the medical and recreational dispensary use. I mean, as long as you're doing your due diligence and applying for the applications, I don't think there's limitations there.
The other thing that I had heard, and we've talked about because it surprised some folks, and John, I'm going to address this question to you specifically. On the 37 licenses, I thought that what we heard from the CRC was that in order to get the license, you need to also be operational. So am I to understand that they're going to come out and make sure that you have everything set up before they give you the license? And as someone said to me, who would be crazy enough to invest all that money in a grow center without knowing for sure that they're going to get the license? Can you comment on that?
Yeah, I think, well, you're presenting a little bit of a catch-22 because clearly the investment is significant, which is the other interesting aspect of a lot of potential applicants. They don't, and I will come back to answer your question specifically. There is a lack of understanding and awareness of the amount of money that it's going to take to set this thing up, as well as the rate of return. And now that you have 37 medical dispensaries, the prices should drop. We're very high here in New Jersey, no pun intended, in relation to what the charges are in other states where there's less of a limitation on the medical dispensaries. But I think the final license is not going to be a stumbling block. It is more, are you checking off the boxes you said you would as part of your application? Because we see this in all regulated industries, that you do go through your pre-approval process, but we don't give you your full license or sign off until we do the final survey. Did you do what you said you were going to do in your application? So I don't think there is significant risk moving forward that way. And I frankly think the CRC is right to impose that requirement to make sure that people, again, comply with the commitment.
Thanks, John. Okay. Retail, Anthony. I believe that, I mean, I've spoken to you in the past about cannabis retail. Can you kind of explain to me what that really means and how that's going to affect or change the landscape in New Jersey and New York? And right now you have dispensaries, obviously, medical dispensaries, but how are things going to change, and what are some of the opportunities and pitfalls?
So, you know, retail is moving more and more into experience, right? And how that applies to specifically for cannabis retail. One is removing the taboo of shopping for cannabis. You know, it is more of this education and consultation in treating availments. You know, like coffee or wine, there are many variations of cannabis and merchandise differentiation from, and this is respective of how, you know, it's displayed and merchandised and programmed within the space, you know, from flowers to tinctures to many other product lines that we are, you know, we have to look at as far as how laying out in the space, how the fixturing works with that. You know, the quality of the product, the quality of experience, quality of the store assets, you know, the brand, you know, exemplifying the origin of the brand, its passion and purpose, you know, the history of the brand, you know, from the cultivation factor, and you know, there are different types of brands out there right now that, you know, some of the brands describe themselves as the Apple of cannabis, so, you know, more of clean and modern aesthetics. Some have this more eased vibe and flavor, nod to the community and localization. Some are bringing nature or biophilic tone with the use of natural woods and sustainable materials and live plants within space. Some have a boutique level of design, which is finer details, more of jewelry-like display cases, sense of luxury and a hotel-like approach. Some have more arts and entertainment with large display screens, music, and art installations. So it really depends on, you know, the sort of the brand direction and the comfort level of that consumer. And it ranges to you know, more of an inferior product to you know, and those within the customer base within the cannabis space, you know, they hold quality very important, and the approachability of the space as well, right? So that there might be you know, a barrier of comfort in coming to these spaces, and it's up to the employees and the knowledge of the employees and how the space flows in order for an ease and non-frictionless shopping experience.
Todd, I've got a question if I can. there, because of the way the law is set up, and on a federal level, in order to sell here in New Jersey, whether it's medical or adult rec, the product has to be grown here. And you mentioned, Anthony, the branding. And so we've seen celebrities and others license their names to products. Whether it's Snoop Dogg or Carlos Santana or others, Willie Nelson. But if you're going and buying the Willie Nelson product here, it had to be grown here. And so to what extent will those license holders really care, if at all, that when they license their name, the grow is under very different conditions because it's got to be grown in very different places in the country. And so the part one question is, when the law changes and you can move product across state lines, which will clearly help the Western states, will that have a negative impact upon all of the limited number of grow license holders here in New Jersey? Part one. And then part two for the panel, because of the license ability here in New Jersey for home delivery, to what extent do we think home delivery will have a negative impact upon the retail brick and mortar as this industry evolves? And so those are two key things that I've talked to clients, is be aware that, again, you may have a really beautiful dispensary here, but at some point the home delivery may impact your sales unless you get a license for that. As in the same thing with the grow and competing nationally. What are Todd or Anthony or Peter, what are your thoughts on those two issues that will impact New Jersey as this industry evolves?
Those are great questions, John. Thank you for bringing them up. I'm going to let the other two panelists start. I'll comment towards the end, but those are great questions. Peter, Anthony, you get to go first.
Yeah, and in all honesty, I'm not privy to the sort of the distribution channel or the restriction thereof as far as licensing agreements, and but I do know that having a parent company of we design within the space for co-brands, right? So so as of now, I have not seen any with our clients. I have not seen any challenges as far as being able to house co-brands within their space. So we cater our fixture and merchandising to both private label as well as co-brands. So should there be should Willie Nelson not be able to be able to partner with some of these parent companies on the East Coast, there are a myriad of other opportunities to partner up with different co-brands.
So John, my view is, yeah, like when and if federalization happens, like these eastern states are going to get killed, Now, logically, there'll be every state's going to be protective, right? There'll be some measure involved, but think of it this way, right? You can buy New York wine today, right? This Long Island wine, but people buy California wine, right? So.
And French wine, and I know that Canadian growers are chomping at the bit in order to sell cross international border.
Of course, yeah. This isn't quite what you were talking about, John, but I think there's a funny thing that happens in cannabis. So you've heard of this term, immaculate germination. So seeds are technically illegal as well, right? So John, to your point, like you've got you've got cookies out in California, let's say, and someone says, I'm going to start selling cookies here. Well, where did the seeds come from? So obviously someone broke the law in order to bring the seeds here. That said, it's one of those things that you just kind of have to accept, right? But I think the interesting thing in cannabis is that, and it's just because of the disparity between state and federal law, right? Like things that are being done in the cannabis industry, you don't see in any other industry at all. And so the logic would dictate that, like, well, eventually we're going to swing to mean, right? We're going to follow the same playbook that happens in every other industry. At some point, someone will be a giant, low cost, volume soda producer, right? So if you don't necessarily care what kind of, weed gets delivered to your door, it'll be really easy to go on like Amazon and say, give me a pound of this stuff. And then there's going to be the crafts, right? Yeah, you want a specific strain, you want a specific taste. So logically, that's going to be the future. Now beverages, I think that's an interesting play, because I think anytime you don't have to retrain consumer behavior, because look, we're well conditioned to have alcohol as the social lubricant, and hey, there's any number of percentage of people that just don't want to smoke, right? And they don't want to take ingestibles and gummies and stuff like that, right? So I think beverage could be a great play. And Anthony, I don't know if you're getting that kind of request where people are thinking about, okay, well, how do we move towards that? How do we move towards creating beverages here? New York, New Jersey market, huge markets, right? But yeah, John, I'm sorry. The simple answer from my perspective is, yeah, we're at some point down the road, and it's not that far away, our growers are going to get killed.
Yeah, and Peter, to your point on the product assortment, besides the flowers and topicals and the vapes and the edibles and tinctures, there's they're extending it into lifestyle and apparel. They're also, it's the beverage. They do have the beverages already in place in some of the programming within, the merchandising options, baked goods, and partnering up with, food partnerships, whether they're under that brand or with another company. So it's an extension of opportunity for the consumer choice.
So John, my take is a few thoughts. First, what's really interesting is that currently, right now in history, you have something that is, I think maybe it's not totally unique, but it's different because you do have what I'll call a local, can I call it a local monopoly? Because you really can't get the cannabis from out of the state, can't bring it in. And so there is, to a certain extent, somewhat of a competitive advantage if you start now and you have your brand, etc. But at some point in time, when the government does decide to make this federally legal, the monopoly is lifted off not just New Jersey, New York, but every state. So now it's going to be a matter of, who has the market share, where the market share is, and who has the best products. So it would be, I would think, yes, Peter, there is going to always be the group that's going to sell to Amazon at the lowest cost because face it, if you go out to dinner with your wife and family, you may be going to Burger King, but every once in a while you want to go to the Capitol Grill. I'm not throwing that in because I own any shares, but just kind of making the distinction.
Product placement, that's good.
That's because the new Capitol Grill is near your office.
That's right. I might be going there tomorrow. So, but there is this interesting idea of a monopoly, and also, the type of people who are going to want to go into a retail store and have the experience and talk to the bud tender. It's going to be the different type of people than who want it to deliver in their house because they don't want anyone to know that they're going to buy cannabis. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to have, I think, for a time, sometime, what I'll call a local monopoly. And then people, even within a state, are going to be competing with each other, which I think is a good thing to, right, once everything opens up. But then when it's lifted, you're going to have a national and even, dare I say, international competition. And will it be that the best, the biggest are going to get the lion's share, or there's always going to be the niche players, the craft players? But I mean, I would say to people who are listening, if you are going to get into the space, understand that if you think this is just going to your sink and turning on the faucets and money is just going to pour out, that's probably not the right way to approach it. Because you need to, I talk to people who want to go into cultivation, and I'm like, do you have anyone who knows how to do this? Because I'm going to tell you, if you plant a cannabis seed in the ground in New Jersey and you expect to get quality flower in New Jersey in the ground, it's probably going to die over the winter. I mean, you need to know what you're doing before you even do this. So that's kind of, I don't know, John, did I answer your question?
Yeah, and I think you also touch on the uniqueness of our the monopoly for New Jersey. What we've all been frustrated, it's taking so darn long to get to this point.
Yeah.
And I think if you're going to give out licenses for growers, and knowing what how long it's going to take to issue those licenses, and knowing how long it's going to take to grow the cannabis, and then the retail licenses aren't going to be accepted till March. We're really not looking. I think my guess is, but everybody has a different crystal ball. We're probably not going to be able to walk into a retail establishment until probably a year from now. We were with the New Jersey was really ahead of the curve for our region. And we have a very unique state because if you're up north, you're very New York centric, and that market is huge because of Manhattan and the bridges and tunnels. And the market is very unique in the southern part of the state for the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania market over their bridges. So when we changed our law, New York changed it like within 20 minutes. Pennsylvania has not moved. So I think that as a state, we still have a lot of opportunity to take advantage of our unique geography, our population base, and our convenience factor for other population bases for us to have a robust facility, industry, and to try to take advantage of that before the federal laws change. And then it's going to be free market like everything else. I totally agree with you, Todd and Peter. Some people drink bud, some people go to the craft beer distillery in their neighborhood, and you get into this competition. So there's always going to be people buying low end, people buying high end, and it'll be up to the dispensaries and the growers to distinguish their product from anyone else, like any other business. And but there'll be challenges ahead. This industry is not for the faint of heart. You have to play long ball here, and you have to have deep pockets.
Well put. We're trying to see if there's some questions just to ask from the panel because that have come in. So,
John, when I'm just to one of your points, what I'm seeing now is that a lot of them are mobilizing, physical spaces to be medical facilities, so that they could they could partner their license to retail. So I'm already seeing, basically the retail format being planned and built now, specifically for medical, so that when the time comes for recreational, they're at the ready.
Yeah, the ATCs are really, and they mentioned this in the article today in conjunction with the announcement of the 30 dispensaries. The ATCs are going to be able to really have a jumping off point sooner as opposed to later to begin to sell adult rec, so long as they can show they have enough product to satisfy their patient base. Right now, that's a problem. But I think you're right, Anthony. I think, again, depending upon availability of the product, they may well come online a lot sooner than my prediction of a year from now for the normal retail dispensaries. The other thing from a design standpoint that we have in a very positive aspect of our law, maybe you can comment on this, we're going to allow for what's called consumption lounges. So long as you have a retail dispensary and as well as an ATC. Now, they haven't opened this part of the license up yet, but they will allow for consumption lounges as part of those licenses. That is something that I think New Jersey learned from some of the troubles that other states have had, because depending upon where you live, whether it's federal housing or you're in town as a tourist in a hotel and you prefer to smoke, smoking is prohibited typically in these places, and so people are going into the parks, their alleys, and they don't want it out in the open like that. So New Jersey will move into an area that other states don't have well, some do, by allowing this as a feature. And so, Anthony, as you're working with your clients, are you advising them that this may be an opportunity for them when they get the license, when this license becomes available as a unique feature.
When we are working with other clients from different states, they tend to shy away from the in-store, consumption lounges and bars. We have not, within our programming, within our design, we have not factored that in as of yet. So I would imagine that, it's sort of a crawl before you walk mentality, where they want to get a retail format done, and then they can change the program later on as it evolves, as the state acceptance and the licensing evolve, that they can change their program within the store. So, but no, John, I have not had to program that.
I gave a talk in Atlantic City last week for a lot of statewide chambers of commerce, and the topic was cannabis tourism. And there are clearly certain areas in the state where cannabis tourism will be a real option, Atlantic City being one of them. And so the consumption lounge will be part of all of that build out at some point as this industry, continues to mature. And cannabis tourism is a good fit with what you were saying, Peter, in terms of the craft product line, to create a different, unique experience, as opposed to the home delivery or walking into a dispensary and trying to figure out what they want to get. So we on some levels, our legislation isn't as good as it should be. I think we're lacking on the expansion of the edible opportunity as well as home grow. I'm pretty confident that in time our legislation will evolve and be amended to enable that. But on the other hand, our legislation is very progressive and proactive to support this industry as it goes forward.
Guys, I just want to interrupt for a minute because there's some questions that came in, and we always try to end exactly on time. So just to have respect for the folks who raised the questions. And if for whatever reason you all who are on the call submitting these questions, if we don't get to them, we promise that we'll answer them via email, because we have your email address. But I'm starting kind of at the bottom, going to the top. So as a representative of an analytical laboratory that is interested in testing cannabis products, what are the critical aspects of cannabis banking that we should be concerned about? I guess that would be you, Peter.
Yeah, from my perspective, that's probably the least risky sort of cannabis banking clientele. Generally speaking, your customers are going to be, hopefully, right? They're going to be licensed entities. So the biggest issue really is just like, who's sending you products, who's sending you money. But again, if you're, I'm imagining your typical laboratory setup, your billing is going to be more ACH, checks, things like that. The biggest issue in cannabis banking really is the cash and accounting for inventory, right? And making sure that those two pieces of data can match up, which in my purview should not be an issue with the laboratory. So, if the questioner has any issues with banking, please feel free to reach out. I can definitely help you get placed.
And another question that came in. Can you have multiple dispensaries under one name, or does it have to be a separate LLC? I think that's one for you, John.
Well, the name isn't as critical as who the owners are. There will be a limitation in terms of how many retail dispensaries an owner can have. As we know, in New Jersey, there is a preference, and I have it here, in terms of social equity businesses, diversity-owned businesses, impact zone businesses. So most people who are trying to get to the head of the line in terms of the criteria are looking to have a diverse ownership to give them the most points on the application. Then you have the people that are behind the application, and they're trying to figure out how to monetize their investment. And there are ways to do that, although the rules are very, very specific. We could spend an hour on that. So it's not a matter of having, okay, Fanberg forms Holdco A and Holdco B and Holdco C and D and E, and I have they're looking past that. Who are the owners? Who's providing the financial backup? Who's providing the management services? So it's a much more deep dive to understand who's really controlling this business. And that's because, and they have the micro businesses, New Jersey does not want to have the international companies dominate this industry in New Jersey. They want New Jerseyans to control it as best they can, as well as those most impacted by the negative effects of prohibition over the last 70, 80 years. So it goes a lot more deeper than just forming a different company.
You know, John, would you believe that that is the number one headache in opening a cannabis banking account, is just getting to the what we call UBO, ultimate beneficial ownership. Just even, I don't know why, but like in every conversation, you know, I say, well, you know, who are the owners? Oh, well, when you say ownership.
Yeah, we've gotten pretty good at, well, where's the money? So we kind of said, where's the money coming from? And then we kind of parse through really what's happening. And I think the application process really goes into it in a very detailed way in terms of who's really owning, who's controlling. Because again, the way, you know, from a corporate standpoint, you can form a limited liability, and I can own 90% of the business, but could be a provision in the agreement that the 10% owner runs and manages the business. So they want to know, and they want to see all these documents, you know, who are the owners and who controls the ownership structure, which I think is the right way to approach it. If they're trying to create this scenario and this business this way, they do need to take a deep dive. And that's why, and I think going to a point you made earlier, Todd, this application process, you know, takes time. It doesn't, you know, it's not a 15-minute fill in the blank. I think the state could have given everybody a little longer lead time, especially for the ones that they're going to accept next week. 2 weeks is really not a lot of time, because when we had the paper applications for the original medical dispensaries, you know, you were given at least 30 days, and there was a tremendous amount of work to be ready for that submission. So it's ownership and control and financing are key issues to this. I think here, if we sit here on December 9th, knowing the first grow licenses are due next week, I think a lot of our colleagues and our friends have been busy at work trying to figure out how to structure this the right way to give them the most amount of points to move to the next step.
Great. So just a few more questions, and then we're going to kind of wrap it up. One question that came in earlier was, if you're planning to do a business this particular person is planning on doing a business in New York as a testing company, and the question is, will crossing state work be allowed so that they can test New Jersey cannabis? So I'm assuming this is a testing lab that's located in New York, and I guess not applying for the New Jersey license. Will they be able to test cannabis that is New Jersey cannabis?
I guess I'm the only regulatory person, so my guess is no. I believe the way this is set up, you're going to have to, if you're selling in New Jersey, you're going to have to use a New Jersey licensed testing facility.
Yeah, they wouldn't be able to transport the goods across state lines.
It can't go across state lines, of course, but from the CRC standpoint, in terms of testing, it'll be a New Jersey licensed testing facility.
Right. Also, another question that I guess we can use the question I was going to raise just as a wrap up, because it's about what should you be doing now. But the fees that some companies charge to assist you in the application process, should you hire and pay the fee or not? That's a good question. I'll let you guys, because aren't we the ones charging the fees? The fees that some companies charge to assist you in the application process, should you hire and pay the fee or not?
So
go ahead, Anthony. I'll go.
Yeah, mine's short and sweet. I mean, I think that, you know, obviously, you know, we partner up with, you know, MEP consultant, site planning, civil, expediting and code, and that's all significant and necessary in both in the pre-design, pre-architecture process and in obtaining your cannabis license and the documentation you will need relative to the physical space and site planning of, and then the approval through the jurisdictions as we go forward into the building department. So all of that works in partnership and is necessary, and yes, you should pay the fee.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I'll kind of jump in here. It would be very interesting if you could put all this together on your own. And if you're not willing to pay someone a fee to do this, you probably shouldn't be in the space. Because this is there, if you look at that application and you go through it, there's a lot there that you have to be a very unique person to be able to do it all yourself without help from somebody else. I mean, that's kind of my 2 cents. Just before we wrap up, any final quick words as to what you should be doing now, maybe 1 sentence or 2 to get ready for the application if you haven't already. So I'll start with Peter, and I'll walk myself all the way down to John will be last. Peter, what should you do now if you haven't started already to apply for the license?
Oh, sure. Mine is easy. You should have a clear, cannabis specific bank account. Your bank should know that you're going to be applying for a license. And if they're not okay with that, find another bank. Find a bank that is okay with it, because there's no reason to hide in the shadows. And again, if you need help, please feel free to reach out.
Anthony?
Evaluate your specifically to what you want to sell. If you have a site in mind, do the due diligence. Plan ahead as far as getting the licensing and the permitting in order. And if you're looking to, if you have expansion plans in mind, do you have, as far as a brand consistency, are you positioned well, and do you have a brand meaning to your new business?
John, you're going last.
Sure. Before I answer, I want to thank you, Todd, and the panelists for putting this morning's program together. Don't tell my partners, but I'm not going to say hire a lawyer. I think the first thing you need to do is develop a business plan.
Right.
Now, you may need to hire consultants to help you put together the business plan. But this is one of the most exciting times in our state's history, and a brand new industry, a brand new economy. We're all in this together, the ground floor, and we've been able to distinguish ourselves from other states and the region to do this. You want to do it right, and they always say that if you represent yourself, you have a fool for a client. So get your business plan together and bring your consultants in. Don't cheap out. You've got one really good shot, maybe a couple, because this is an evolving industry. You want to put your best foot forward, and that's the way to do it.
That's a great way to end. Can we just go to the last slide, Alex, if there is a last slide? If you are interested in downloading, there is some information right here to get for free that we usually offer, budget forecasting guide for an emerging cannabis business. And I just wanted to close it out by thanking the panel. Thank you guys so much. You will be on the future webinars. Our plan at SACS is to keep on bringing you this information, perhaps every other week or maybe more frequently as needed. So be looking for us. We love the cannabis space. We love the people who are in it, and we really want to be part of this growing, emerging practice. So thank you, Peter, Anthony, John. We'll see you next time, I guess. Take care.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.